There's something heartbreaking about watching someone pour their entire soul into loving others while slowly disappearing in the process. You know the type. They're the ones who remember everyone's birthday, who show up at 2 a.m. when you're falling apart, who somehow always know exactly what you need to hear. They love with an intensity that's both beautiful and devastating to witness. But here's what most people don't see. Behind that generous heart is often someone who has never learned how to receive love in return. They've become so skilled at giving that they've forgotten how to take. So masterful at reading others' needs that they've lost touch with their own. So devoted to healing everyone around them that they've neglected their own wounds. I've been thinking about this lately, watching people I care about slowly fade away while everyone around them flourishes. They're like emotional gardeners who tend to every flower in the garden except themselves, wondering why they feel so empty in a space full of beauty they helped create. There's a quiet tragedy unfolding in our world, and it's happening to some of the most beautiful souls among us. The tragedy of people who love too much. Let me explain what I mean by loving too much, because this isn't about having a big heart or being generous with your affection. This is about something far more complex and potentially destructive. Loving too much is when your capacity to give love far exceeds your ability to receive it. It's when you've become so identified with being the giver, the healer, the supporter, that you've lost access to your own needs, desires, and emotional requirements. It's not just about being selfless, it's about having a self that exists primarily in service to others. These aren't people who occasionally go overboard in relationships. These are individuals whose entire sense of worth and identity has become tied to how much they can give, fix, heal, or support others. They measure their value by their usefulness, their love by their sacrifice, their worth by their willingness to disappear for others' comfort. You see this in the friend who always listens but never shares their own struggles. The partner who anticipates every need but can't articulate their own. The family member who holds everyone together while quietly falling apart. The colleague who takes on everyone's emotional labor while their own stress goes unnoticed. What makes this particularly tragic is that their love is genuine. This isn't manipulation or people-pleasing for approval, though it can look similar from the outside. This is authentic, deep love that has become unbalanced and ultimately self-destructive. They truly care more about others' well-being than their own, and they see this as virtue rather than dysfunction. The cruel irony is that while everyone around them benefits from their endless giving, they often end up feeling more alone than anyone else. They're surrounded by people who love what they do for them, but few who truly see who they are beneath all that service. This pattern usually develops early, often in childhood, when love became conditional on caretaking, when being needed felt safer than being wanted, when giving became the only reliable way to feel valuable. The first danger of loving too much is that you become addicted to being needed, and this addiction slowly consumes your authentic self until you exist primarily as a function rather than a person. When your identity becomes built around being indispensable to others, you unconsciously start seeking out people who need fixing, healing, or saving. You're drawn to the broken, the struggling, the emotionally unavailable, not because you're masochistic, but because these relationships confirm your worth and purpose. You feel most alive when someone needs you most desperately. This creates a devastating cycle. You pour yourself into relationships with people who are so focused on their own healing that they have little capacity to see or nurture you. You choose partners who are emotionally unavailable because available people don't trigger your caretaking instincts. You surround yourself with friends who take more than they give because balanced relationships feel foreign and uncomfortable. I think about this like emotional vampirism, but with a twist. You're not the victim, you're the willing donor. You've trained yourself to find fulfillment in being drained. The emptiness you feel after giving everything away has become so familiar that fullness feels wrong, selfish, even frightening. You start to believe that your value lies entirely in what you can provide for others. Your talents, your insights, your emotional intelligence, all of it becomes currency you spend to purchase love and connection. But here's the cruel mathematics of this exchange. The more you give to prove your worth, the less others value what you're giving. What costs you everything becomes commonplace to them. The most heartbreaking part is watching these people slowly disappear. They become so skilled at shape-shifting to meet others' needs that they lose track of their own shape. They can tell you everything about everyone else's inner world while becoming strangers to themselves. They know how to love others in exactly the way those others need to be loved, but they've forgotten what they themselves need. This addiction to being needed also creates a terrible fear of being unnecessary. They panic at the thought of others becoming self-sufficient because their entire identity is built on being the solution to others' problems. They unconsciously enable dependency because independence in others threatens their sense of purpose. The tragedy deepens when you realize that their excessive giving often prevents others from developing their own emotional resilience. By always being the answer, they rob others of the opportunity to find their own strength. Their love, meant to heal, sometimes keeps wounds open because healing would mean they're no longer needed. The second danger is that you develop an allergy to receiving love, which creates a devastating paradox. The more you give, the more isolated you become from the very thing you're trying to create. People who love too much often have a deep, unconscious terror of being on the receiving end of care. When someone tries to give to them, they feel uncomfortable, guilty, even physically anxious. They deflect compliments, minimize their achievements, and redirect conversations away from their own needs or struggles. They've become so identified with being the strong one that vulnerability feels like a betrayal of who they're supposed to be. This happens because receiving requires a level of self-worth that they've never developed. To accept love, care, or support, you have to believe you deserve it. But when your entire identity is built on earning love through service, the idea of deserving love simply for existing feels impossible to grasp. You'll watch them perform elaborate dances to avoid being helped. They'll say they're fine when they're falling apart. They'll insist they don't need anything while secretly longing for someone to see through their performance. They'll even get angry when others try to care for them because receiving threatens the very foundation of how they understand relationships. This creates a terrible isolation. They're surrounded by people who care about them, but they can't let that care in. It's like being thirsty while standing in a river, but being unable to drink. The love is there, available, offered freely, but they lack the internal mechanism to receive it. What's particularly cruel is that their inability to receive often frustrates the people who want to love them back. Friends and family start to feel helpless, even resentful, when their attempts at reciprocity are constantly rejected. The very people who benefit from their endless giving begin to feel shut out when they try to give in return. This creates a cycle of increasing isolation. The more they give without receiving, the more depleted they become. The more depleted they become, the more they feel they need to give to maintain their relationships. The more they give, the more others expect it, and the less space there is for reciprocity. They become like emotional black holes. They can absorb infinite amounts of others' pain and need, but they can't reflect back any light. They can hold space for everyone else's emotions, but have no space for their own. They become repositories for others' healing while remaining untouchable in their own suffering. The saddest part is watching them slowly starve in relationships full of people who would gladly feed them if only they knew how to open their mouths. The third and perhaps most devastating danger is that you begin to confuse love with self-sacrifice, creating a distorted understanding of relationships that makes genuine intimacy impossible. When you love too much, you unconsciously believe that real love requires the erasure of self. You think that if you're not suffering for someone, you're not loving them properly. If you're not giving until it hurts, you're being selfish. If you're not putting their needs above your own, you're not being a good partner, friend, or family member. This creates relationships that are fundamentally unbalanced and, ironically, unloving. Because true love, the kind that heals and nourishes both people, requires two whole individuals choosing each other, not one person dissolving into the other's needs. When you love by disappearing, you rob the relationship of half its potential depth and authenticity. You start to measure love by sacrifice rather than by joy, connection, or mutual growth. The more you suffer for someone, the more you believe you love them. The more you give up for them, the more committed you feel. This turns love into a kind of beautiful martyrdom that feels noble but is actually deeply destructive. What's particularly tragic is that this kind of love often creates the very problems it's trying to solve. When you love someone by sacrificing yourself, you inadvertently teach them that love is about taking rather than sharing. You model relationships where one person gives and the other receives, where one person has needs and the other exists to meet them. This dynamic often attracts people who are comfortable being loved this way. People who have their own wounds around intimacy and find it easier to be adored than to engage in the messy work of mutual vulnerability. You end up in relationships with people who can't see you clearly because you've trained them to focus only on what you can provide. The cruelest irony is that in trying to love so completely, you often end up feeling unloved. Because the kind of love you're giving, selfless, sacrificial, one-directional, isn't the kind that creates intimacy. Intimacy requires presence, and you can't be present when you've erased yourself. It requires vulnerability, and you can't be vulnerable when your role is to be the strong one. You become like a beautiful song played so softly that no one can hear it. Your love is real, deep, and powerful, but it's expressed in ways that make you invisible. You give everything while receiving nothing, not because others don't want to give to you, but because you've created a dynamic where your needs don't exist. The tragedy is that in trying to love perfectly, you often love in ways that prevent the very connection you're seeking. I once knew a woman named Elena who could make anyone feel like the most important person in the world. She had this gift of seeing straight into people's souls and reflecting back their best selves. Friends would leave conversations with her feeling understood, valued, and somehow more hopeful about their lives. She was the person everyone called during their darkest moments, the one who somehow always knew exactly what to say. Elena worked as a nurse, which seemed perfect for someone with her natural healing abilities. But her caretaking extended far beyond her professional life. She was the daughter who managed her aging parents' medical appointments while working full-time. The friend who drove across town at midnight to comfort someone going through a breakup. The partner who anticipated her boyfriend's needs so perfectly that he rarely had to ask for anything. From the outside, Elena's life looked full of love and purpose. She was surrounded by people who adored her, grateful for her endless generosity and emotional availability. Her apartment was always full of friends seeking advice, her phone constantly buzzing with people who needed her support. She seemed to have mastered the art of loving and being loved. But I started to notice something troubling during our conversations. Elena could tell me intimate details about everyone in her life. Their fears, dreams, childhood traumas, relationship patterns. She knew who was struggling with anxiety, who was considering a career change, who needed encouragement about their creative projects. But when I asked about her own dreams, her own struggles, her own needs, she would deflect with a smile and change the subject back to others. It took months before I realized that Elena was slowly disappearing. Not physically, but emotionally. She had become so skilled at being what others needed that she had lost touch with who she actually was underneath all that service. She could read everyone else's emotional weather, but had no idea what climate existed in her own heart. The breaking point came when Elena's boyfriend of 3 years left her for someone else. As she tried to process this devastating loss, she made a shocking discovery. She had no idea how to be comforted. When friends tried to support her the way she had always supported them, she felt uncomfortable, almost panicked. She didn't know how to receive the very thing she had been giving so freely to others. In the months that followed, Elena began to uncover a painful truth. She had been loving others the way she desperately wanted to be loved, but she had never learned how to ask for or accept that love in return. Her relationships were full of people who cared about her, but she had trained them all to focus on their own needs while ignoring hers. The journey back to herself was slow and often painful. Elena had to learn to disappoint people, to say no, to let others struggle without immediately rushing to fix them. She had to discover who she was when she wasn't being useful to someone else. Most challenging of all, she had to learn to believe that she could be loved for who she was, not just for what she could provide. Elena's story taught me that loving too much isn't really about love at all. It's about fear. Fear of being unnecessary, unwanted, unseen. And healing requires learning the difference between loving others and losing yourself in the process. So how do we learn to love without losing ourselves? How do we maintain our generous hearts while developing the capacity to receive love in return? The path forward begins with what I call radical self-compassion, treating yourself with the same tenderness you so freely give to others. This means learning to recognize your own needs as valid and important, not as inconveniences to be minimized or ignored. Start by practicing what I call emotional archaeology on yourself. Just as you can read others' emotions with incredible accuracy, turn that same attention inward. Ask yourself, what do I actually need right now? What am I feeling beneath the urge to fix or help? What would I want someone to offer me in this moment? Learn to distinguish between loving and enabling. True love sometimes requires allowing others to struggle, to find their own strength, to develop their own emotional resources. When you constantly rescue others from their difficulties, you rob them of growth opportunities while depleting yourself. Practice receiving in small doses. When someone offers you a compliment, resist the urge to deflect it. When a friend wants to help you, let them. When someone asks how you're doing, try answering honestly instead of automatically asking about them. These small acts of receiving are like exercises for an atrophied muscle. Set what I call love boundaries, limits on how much you give that preserve space for your own needs and growth. This isn't about becoming selfish, it's about becoming sustainable. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you can't love others well when you're running on emotional fumes. Most importantly, understand that learning to receive love doesn't diminish your capacity to give it. In fact, when you allow yourself to be nourished by others' care, you become a more authentic and sustainable source of love. You stop giving from depletion and start giving from fullness. Remember that people who truly love you want to give to you as much as they want to receive from you. By constantly rejecting their care, you're actually depriving them of the joy of loving you back. Healthy relationships are rivers, not wells. Love flows in both directions. The goal isn't to love less, but to love more skillfully. To love in ways that nourish both yourself and others, that create genuine intimacy rather than dependency, that honor your full humanity rather than just your capacity to serve. And that, my friends, is perhaps the most beautiful transformation of all. When people who love too much learn to love themselves as well, they don't become less loving, they become more powerfully loving than ever before. When you stop loving from emptiness and start loving from fullness, your care becomes more authentic, more sustainable, and ultimately more healing for everyone involved. You stop attracting people who need to be saved and start attracting people who want to grow alongside you. You stop enabling dependency and start inspiring independence. The people in your life don't lose a caretaker, they gain a whole human being. Someone who can be vulnerable as well as strong, who can receive as well as give, who can share their own struggles as well as hold space for others. This kind of love creates real intimacy, the kind where both people are seen, valued, and nourished. Your generous heart doesn't disappear when you learn to love yourself. It becomes more discerning, more intentional, more effective. You learn to give from choice rather than compulsion, from abundance rather than need, from love rather than fear. In a world that often confuses self-sacrifice with love, choosing to love yourself as much as you love others becomes a radical act. It's a declaration that you too deserve the very thing you've been so freely giving away. Your love is not diminished by including yourself in it. It's completed.